What's up, internet people? Living on the other side of your computers? It's your boy Jack Slack. Fights Gone By podcast episode 86, coming at you on the 21st of June. I'm fresh off my morning workout, set a PR in the bench press. Everybody else is out here setting the record straight and I'm just setting records. Not actually much to brag about, my bench press isn't much over my body weight, but it was tough for me, and that's what matters. To be fair, that's one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about being into martial arts my entire life. It's put me into doing different things that I didn't enjoy to begin with, like running. Fucking hated that. Compound lifts. As you get older, you switch your not priorities, but what you enjoy doing more. There's going to be some day when I'm not going to be able to get on the mats because I've been smashed too badly. And it'd be nice to have another hobby when I'm done with this. But in the meantime, just trucking along as usual. Did my workout, came home. Been spinning around a nunchuck and watching Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender series. And that's been my morning so far. Oh, I forgot to use my intro. It's going to be It's Your Goy, because I just put up the Barney Ross episode. It was very funny in my head, at least. But a bit of a slow week in MMA. I mean, our event this weekend is Donald Cerrone versus Leon Edwards. I like both those fighters. You probably like both those fighters. But we all know that when that's the main event, it's not really a card that they're banking a lot on. Also, the poster is shit. It's happening in Singapore, but the poster is like the Northern Lights with a white frame around it, and then Donald Cerrone looking a little bit old, and Leon Edwards looking like they've just taken the picture straight off his fighter profile in the middle. That's it. It's just a really bad poster. But then you can't put pride levels of effort and thought into all your posters, or any of your posters if you're the UFC. But we'll do some news, and then we'll talk about the things that I've been watching over the last few days, catching up on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender series. I actually surprised myself with how much I enjoyed that. Tenshin Nasukawa had a fight, and if you're a diehard weeb, you're probably waiting for me to shit on him, but it was actually a really good fight. That's about all that's been going on. So then we'll do some questions, and then we'll talk about the upcoming event, and then we'll fuck off for this week. Sounds like a plan, Stan. So news! Breaking news this morning. Rampage and Wanderlei. Well, Bellator teased a quote-unquote can't-miss announcement involving Rampage and Wanderlei Silva. And then Wanderlei, being the completely tone-deaf muppet that he is, immediately said that I am fighting Rampage. Just ruin any speculation that anyone had. Ruin any reason to turn up to that press event. Bellator were hosting a press event in London a little while ago, and they had a free buffet and Michael Venom Page available for questions. And I was like, free buffet is tempting. I think it was at the Savoy or something too. But then I realised there's actually no point in me going to that. I'd hate it. But yeah, so they've announced Rampage versus Wanderlei, a fight. Someone said this would have been exciting in 2007, but their third fight happened in 2008, and that was still way too late. Wanderlei was already washed up then. And Rampage, we used to call him Bumpage, but I heard another one the other day, Hampage, because he's just so fucking fat now. Just turns up out of shape for every fight. Well, he turned up last fight, fat, 250 pounds, but still somehow had abs. Similar to fat Frank Mir turning up, still somehow with abs. Either these guys are getting those ab implants on the front of their gut, or Bellator's testing is even more non-existent than we thought it was. Bellator's testing is a questionnaire. It's only one line. But yeah, the amount they pay these guys, I just can't... There are going to be some people who still give a shit about this. But the amount that they pay these guys just doesn't justify the fights. The Chael versus... I can understand giving Chael a big paycheck because people forget that he's not an interesting fighter because he's so good on the microphone. Rampage hasn't been interesting in years and also really phones it in when he's talking. And Wanderlei hasn't won a fight in years and barely ever gets in the cage. The fight between Chael and Wanderlei was fucking hilarious because you realised, oh yeah, Wanderlei never actually learned to stop takedowns. He relied on grabbing a guillotine, getting taken down, and then the referee giving a yellow card and standing him up. That was the Wanderlei Silva guard. But yeah, that's going on apparently. Or well, they will announce it and make it official, but everyone already knows, so they do make it official. But yeah, how exciting! Don't announce a press conference and then announce who's going to be there if you aren't going to announce the fight. Mind you, Bellator have done this before. They've announced a press conference with MVP and Paul Daly and then not announced the fight. They then announced that Paul Daly was fighting someone and MVP was fighting some scrub. Other news, UFC releases Josh Barnett. This has just happened this morning. Very interesting. I imagine probably to do with his many, many failed drug tests. I love Josh Barnett. We're bros. Mainly because I write about Minoru Suzuki and he loves Minoru Suzuki as much as I do. But obviously he has failed a lot of drug tests in his time. I think he was arguing that he hadn't failed, like he'd actually had a tainted supplement for the most recent one. I think he's been fairly okay with admitting that the previous ones he was just taking drugs. You know, we all have those people that we have blind spots for. And I have a bit of a blind spot for Josh Barnett because he's so much fun when I watch him fight. On the other hand, him being released by the UFC does free him up to do stuff, which is the big problem was like there was a point where we thought he was going to be fighting in the UFC and competing in Meta Morris at the same time, and it was so hype. And then he failed the drug test and has been sitting out forever. I think he's been doing for commentary for New Japan recently, or did for a little while. He was doing something with Jim Ross, but he's been heavily involved in training fighters, training wrestlers, doing some pro wrestling. Josh has always seemed like a serial dabbler. He's someone who's very good at lots of things, but really only dabbles in each of them like for a little while and then moves on. And he always seemed to like fight professionally when the spirit moved him to, rather than putting together a campaign towards a belt or anything like that. But one of the most entertaining fighters in the heavyweight division, one of the best technical fighters in the heavyweight division. His striking was never top notch, but in his more recent performances, you could see it getting so much better. And he had started developing clinch work that was just putting everyone else to shame. He was one of the better dirty boxers in MMA, full stop, by the time that he had his last fight. So, selfishly, I'm exactly the same about Josh Barnett that people are about Cro Cop, except, Cro Cop was much more crocked before he left. But I'm in the same position where I'm feeling like, I hope he finds somewhere where, they won't drug test him as much, and it won't matter as much if he does fail. But yeah, interesting nonetheless, because he was he's a big name with fight fans. I don't know how big he is outside of the hardcore community. Certainly they like taking him to Japan, and he did well there. Bit of a slow news week other than that. Linton Vassal's going to heavyweight. I do like Linton Vassal a lot. He wasn't doing badly against Phil Davis, but he has now lost to Phil Davis and Ryan Bader. And, those are the top two guys at light heavyweight. There's not really much more point like hanging around there and losing to other guys eventually. Middleweight seems off the table because he's a gigantic dude. So going up to heavyweight seems sensible. I mean, there's not a lot of good heavyweights in Bellator. You've got the belly tournament, as I call it. Mitrione's probably the best actual heavyweight they have there. Minakov obviously isn't there anymore. He's locked into a contract, so he can't compete anywhere else in North America. But Scott Coker won't pay him nothing. Czech Congo, maybe, but it's really slim pickings up that end. I could see Linton Vassal beating Fedor or Frank Mir. Plus, it frees him up to just pack on a ton of weight, and with the drug testing in Bellator, he could probably just go the over him route. And with that sort of Neil Melanson-inspired top game, I think that'd be really fun if he just got massive. Just got massive and started Americanering people. That'd be fucking amazing. Other bits of news this week, Stephen Thompson slagging off the oblique kick, or rather kicks to the front of the knee. I'm doing an article on that today, so, I'll cover that, but it's always an interesting debate. Well, it's not actually, because people just have their opinion and they shout it and go, no, I won't hear anything otherwise. You either come down on the, why don't we just ban punches as well side of the debate, or the it's too dangerous, someone's going to get their knee inverted side of the debate. Well, to be fair, there's also those people who are like, it's unstoppable, it's a cheese technique. It's not unstoppable. Fucking nothing's unstoppable. For a while, people were like, the belt grip on the berimbolo, or the worm guard, you can't unravel it. That should be illegal. Wait, no, people aren't hitting them nearly as often anymore, because as soon as you know how to deal with something and you're anticipating it, you don't have to, you don't have to think of clever counters as long as you know what to avoid. Don't let them pass the lapel through your leg. Don't let them punt your or stamp on your knee as you step in. But there have been dudes who have been seriously injured by them. It's not been like bone through the skin like people want, but when people say to me, oh, why don't you list the long list of injuries from it in a sarcastic way, there are genuinely guys who've been put out for a fairly long time. Timu, whatever his name was, who fought Mark Jacasey, was fighting very cautiously, took one in the knee, MCL snapped, he immediately ran at Jacasey and got knocked out with a punch, but he hasn't fought since. March 2017 that fight happened, and he was out with an MCL tear, and he hasn't fought since. And the other example I'll be using a few examples, but another one is Rampage, because in the Jones fight he badly injures his knee, that he can't cut weight for the Ryan Bader fight, and he hasn't been the same since, but that might just be because he's lazy and doesn't care anymore. Anyway, let's move on. So what happened last weekend, or the previous weekend? Well, I've been watching Tenshin versus Rod Tung, variously Rod Tang and Rod Tung, depending on where you read it. But I'm going with Rod Tung. Rod meet tongue. An excellent line for use in your foreplay. But this was a really good fight. I wrote an article about it called like Tenshin Nasukawa Edge's decision by skin of teeth or something like that, or a wild fight with sketchy officiating. And no matter where you fell on the decision, the officiating was fucking sketchy. The Japanese referees are terrible, and they make Tenshin look very bad. Tenshin, obviously, awesome counterpuncher. I wrote an article before this called Tenshin Nasukawa Kickboxing Messiah, where we talked about the Swakim Phoenix fight, and he was a Thai champion, a very gangly Thai champion, very, completely different build to Rod Tung, and different stance, obviously. But he did a very good job of just constantly either needling with the front leg or the jab and feinting lots and really throwing Tenshin off, because Tenshin loves the very similar to McGregor, Thompson, all those others, back step off to the left and throw the left-hand counter through the open side. Once you put him against the ropes, that becomes a lot less useful, and he either tries to throw the left straight right at you from square on and trade with you, which is never a great idea, or he'll try and check hook and run out the side. And Swakim had a really good success in that fight, but didn't really push his offensive on the ropes as much. He really put Tenshin in these positions and had Tenshin knackered in round 3, 4, and 5, and Tenshin was sprinting to get away from the ropes. But he didn't really do as much as he should along the ropes, whereas Rod Tung walked through the best punches of Tenshin, playing to the crowd the entire time, and then landed really good body shots along the ropes. It's a two-ended thing, because obviously you've got to... He was getting hit a lot on the way in, and even though he wasn't like visibly shaken by it, you can't just ignore the punches because he's telling you to ignore the punches. But on the other end of it, I thought Tenshin did a much better job getting off the ropes than he did against Swakim. I'm saying that name so fucking badly, but you're gonna have to put up with it. That fight, he really looked lost aside from a check hook wheeling out and the left hand. This fight, he actually was weaving, ducking, changing directions, and it was clear that he'd learned something from that previous fight. And that's how I wrapped up the article. I said, it's one thing to have talent and bangability. Wait, no, that's women. It's one thing to be... I was going to say he's Black Explosive, but I'd have to go with like Jap Explosive or something like that. But it's one thing to be super explosive and talented. But if you don't change when you start having problems show up, you aren't going to be a great fighter. Whereas he did have these problems show up, and he has adapted a bit. He was still having problems with it, but he was showing new looks. And that, to me, is more indicative of what a good fighter Tenshin is, or will be, more than the knockouts over Scrubs in Ryzen, or even the wins over Thais before these two. The last two were really hard for him, but I think he grew more between those two fights on the screen, what we saw of him, than he did in the previous one, all the previous ones. I will say, though, that the pacing thing is always going to be a problem, because he is a banger, and he looks to bang fairly early and fairly often. He's throwing hard from the very first counter, and he's countering from the opponent's very first move. So he ends up tiring himself out late in the fight. Well, later in the fight, not even late in the fight, to be honest. What you will notice is that Tenshin does play the referee for time, and the referees do help him. The fucking Kaitengeri, or Domowashi Kaitengeri, or whatever you want to call it, the Rolling Thunder. The thing where he flips onto the floor. Kickboxing fans fucking love it. Because if you score a knockout with it, that's amazing. Problem is, there shouldn't be techniques that you can just throw with impunity and not have to worry about a counter because you're on the floor. But the way that Tenshin uses it is to buy time. You will notice this in this fight and in the previous one against Suakim. When Tenshin's tired, he will run around the ring and then he'll wait for you to come to him and he'll try and knock your head off with the kick and then he'll take his sweet time getting up. And in the 5th round against Suakim, the referee was dragging him up off the floor, which you can't be seen to be doing. The other thing he does is grab a leg and then run through on a double leg takedown, which when the last guy he faced in Rising, who had been a career-long wrestler and never kickboxed before, was doing it to Tenshin when he had his brain scrambled by Tenshin's left hand, that was a bit more forgivable. Tenshin has had a grand total of 3 MMA fights, and he isn't training to take people down. But he runs through on... He did it... I think he did it to Suakim, but he did it here. He runs through on a double leg, and then he's on his knees and takes forever getting up off the floor. He was really milking the breaks, and he's been holding clinches for a lot too, particularly against Suakim. The Suakim fight, a little bit more interesting because they allowed clinch work. And this is always the thing, like Knockout and Rise, you're going to have trouble because there's the die-hard Muay Thai nerds, and then there's the Japanese kickboxing weebs, and they really get angry at each other about this stuff. I just enjoy people hitting each other, so I'm on neither side of this. But the kickboxing fans love action, so they're not as fond of the clinch. The Muay Thai fans are always like, well, they don't allow the clinch because then the Muay Thai guys would just come in and mop up. Case in point, Walkout. But Tenshin's been fighting these guys under the rules that do allow elbows and the clinch variously. Problem is when you go from one to the other. So he was fighting Suakim under a rule set that allowed clinch work, and Suakim kneed him in the chest and threw him to the mat. And Tenshin came up holding the back of his head, and the referee gave him like a 20-second break in the corner, as if there had been a foul, and then didn't warn Suakim for anything. So basically, it had been a knockdown, and he didn't score it. Yeah, it's pretty bad. The other one is that Tenshin just calls his own groin shots now. There was a knee that hit him in the gut while he was clearly tired in like round 4. And he just goes, oh, my groin, and gets another like 30-second break. And Rod Tongue's going, what the fuck? And screaming and like, he's a madman, that guy. He was jumping on the ropes and like standing on the ropes and looking out to the crowd and waving his arms. But I will say it's an absolutely brilliant fight. There were signs of growth in Tenshin. I didn't like the amount of time wasting he was getting away with. I did like the way he was doing the time wasting. You know, it's like people always get on at me for glorifying dirty tactics and things like that. There is a part of me that just loves getting away with cheeky shit, the cheeky nodder, for instance. But there's also a part of me that goes like, the referee should be better than this. But terrific fight. Watch that fight. It was so good. I realised that if you didn't watch that fight, I've just now spent 10 minutes talking about some weird fight out in Japan that nobody cared about. But anyway, the other one that I watched this week was I was catching up on some Dana White's Tuesday Night Fight series, because obviously Greg Hardy fought. I was not up on the entire Greg Hardy situation. I did know that it was something to do with domestic abuse, and then they put his picture up, and it just reminded me of that old Hemingway line, he has the eyes of an unsuccessful rapist. Very like somber looking dude. But yeah, he came out and like it's clear that he has athletic gifts that we are not seeing in MMA. And I think the UFC's Performance Institute publishing their results this week really hammered home that while these guys are incredible at what they do and they train very hard to do what they do, in terms of raw athletic specimens, a lot of them aren't even close to the sort of thing that would get you like an NBA or an NFL second look. The vertical jumps were particularly unimpressive. I saw some people speculating on whether that was done with like hands on hips or something like that, but a lot of the numbers were not even close to up to snuff with what you'd expect from like the NFL and things like that. Proportionally, obviously, we got much lower weight guys than that, but very interesting nonetheless. But yeah, Greg Hardy, you could see that he had athletic instincts. He was good on his feet. Someone asked me how he looked, and it was a very short fight, and he looked both simultaneously good and bad. Like his attacks, he looked a bit rushed and janky because he was clearly running in to knock this guy out quickly. But then he like rebounded, did like a quick fade back and countered with the right hand, and that looked really good. I was going, oh my god, that's what we need at heavyweight, some of that. Obviously it's blown up in the recent week. Jessica Rose Clark, who's fighting this weekend, is a victim of domestic abuse and was really obviously pissed off about the fact that the UFC are pushing this guy. If you aren't aware, the UFC aren't like, give this guy a second chance. They are doing this to get media attention. They want outrage. It's not about giving this guy his second chance at life and because he'll be an amazing athlete. It's pretty much because, well, firstly, it got eyes on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, but now that they can justify him coming into the UFC, he'll get eyes on a UFC card. And this is the universal truth of fighting. Fight fans will watch you because you're good. Casual fans will watch you because they want to see you lose. Detestable people do very well at the box office. And then the other one from the same episode, we're on week 2 now. Chris Curtis. I fucking love this guy, and he didn't get the contract. Oh, hold on a second. More tea needed.
Sometimes these things happen in MMA.
And I'm back. Right, we were talking about Chris Curtis. Yeah, made a clean break from MMA. Has something like 20 fights on his record. And, this was supposed to be his, big chance at the UFC. And he did have, undisputedly, the most impressive finish on that card. And the UFC was still like, nah, mate, don't need you. I really liked him. I hadn't seen any of him before, but he... I mean, the large amount of fights on the regional circuit... the old school cutie boxing style, and probably being black, all made me think of like an Archie Moore sort of character. I would love it if he just went on and had 100 fights and just beat up hometown kids for pennies. Actually, he was really smooth. He was fighting southpaw and using a shoulder roll, a little bit Jersey Joe-ish in the lackadaisicalness. You got the sense that he was much better than he was showing. Like the one good left hand he landed in the second round, it was just, they were like, you need to do something now, and he stepped in, jab, left straight, no lead up, lands it flush, hurts the guy, and then goes back to doing nothing. But then in the third round, he was showing like a right shoulder feint and getting the guy leaning off to the open side, and then he just brought up the hook kick, smooth as anything, didn't look particularly hard, didn't look particularly fast, but he caught him perfect, set him down, finished him with punches. It was lovely. Also liked his attitude, because in the corner, Sam Alvey and his other coach through the cage were saying, land that elbow. And he went, I did land that elbow. And they went, well, land it again. The other thing was his stance was very weird at points, especially when he was following around the cage. He was side on with both feet pointing out in like a sumo stance, or a shikodachi, if you will. But I got to say, I was not convinced I'd enjoy Dana White's Golden Ticket Tombola Knockout Fest, or whatever it's called. But I really did. They got Bisping on commentary, which was fun, and they've also got no crowd, or like a very small crowd, and no intro music or anything like that. I quite enjoy. It's interesting because I thought I loved pageantry, which is why I love Ryzen and Pride and things like that. But I also think there's a place for having none of that. Maybe I just like different shit. I think it would get old if that was ever a UFC event, but I think that decision, that production decision for this, not only means that they can strip back the budget and the production values, but that it feels more not the UFC, but the way to the UFC. Because the UFC does have feeder leagues, things like Invicta and what's Ed Suarez's one, RFA. Wherever you spent the first few fights on UFC Undisputed. But, it's got feeder leagues like that. But I think, people can't watch Jungle Fight or whatever, just generally, unless they hunt it out. If you put this on TV, or Fight Pass rather, it serves as a really nice piece of programming. Also, dirt cheap to hire these guys because they're not in the UFC. And also, even if they score an amazing knockout and you don't want them, you can just be like, nah, not interesting enough in your other fights, mate. We had you scouted. Though it was a strange decision not to bring in Chris Curtis, because like even if his other fights are very boring, which I don't know, but even if his other fights, he's been finished once by rear naked choke, and that was 2011. So he's been at this a long time. Even if his other fights were really boring, and the matchmakers had said, we probably don't want to bring this guy in, even if he scores an amazing knockout. The only thing that people know about him is that he scored that amazing knockout, so he would have traction in his first UFC fight at least. But a shame nonetheless. He'll probably get called in as a last-minute replacement for a welterweight fight at some point. Anyway, let's do some questions. I managed to patter on about there not being a fight this week. Hi Jack, love the podcast. Thanks for all your hard work and quality insight. My question is regarding possible countering/defense to the increasingly popular low round kick to the calf, like Nunes used so well against Pennington, after Pennington's leg was softened up. In the later rounds, her only response to the low kicks was to lift her front leg up and out of the way of the kick, leaving her on one leg and posing no threat. In Pennington's situation, if your leg is too battered to check kicks, would it make more sense to simply throw a snapping front kick every time the opponent tries a low round kick? So while you're forced to be on one leg, you're at least throwing up some offense. It seems to me that you would be both getting your leg out of the way of the front kick and throwing a kick at the opponent's stationary torso. My friend Justin said that in Taekwondo, he used to throw a kick every time someone started their technique, even if it's just to interrupt whatever technique they were attempting. Would this technique work well? Perhaps mixed in with checks early so as to keep your opponent guessing. If this technique would work, is it a safe generalization to say that throwing a counter is a better approach than just evading or blocking the opponent's attack? Thanks for your time, Cameron. P.S. Earl Grey is delicious, but have you tried Lady Grey? A more citrusy and also delicious version. Lady Grey is what I buy when there is no Earl Grey on the shelf in the supermarket, and it is a rancid concoction. But we got off on the wrong foot here, Cameron, so it's a question. One of the main things in Muay Thai, generally, if you're watching good Nak Muay fight, low kicks, I feel like a lot of guys who had Muay Thai backgrounds or kickboxing backgrounds, when they got to MMA, were like, oh wow, low kick is there all the time because people stand wider and lower because of the threat of the takedown. Muay Thai, generally, low kicks, firstly, not nearly as devastating. Guys don't get to run into it for days. But secondly, they're often like the main way of dealing with someone kicking you is just to keep probing them with the teep. So two really good kickers, you will see like an awkward battle of them being like going for a kick, but then teeping, but then, or kicking and bringing the leg back, but high so that they can immediately teep again with the leg that's just kicked. And it's not even like, when you say teep, you think of blasting the dude with a stomping front kick, but we're talking about just like nudging people, and that's what a lot of top Nak Muay kickers do, because once the opponent is on one leg, they are committing everything to that, and you just need to move their center of balance a little bit to ruin their kick. Front snap kick with the leg that's going to be kicked, tricky to do that in time. I do like what Robert Whittaker was doing against, I do like Robert Whittaker. There you go. That's the end to all questions on the Fights Gone By podcast. But Robert Whittaker against Yoel Romero won when his lead leg was trashed. He started throwing those front kicks with his right leg, really committed ones, like throwing his whole weight in and slamming in the kick. And conventionally, we would think, why would you be kicking and standing on your injured leg while he's targeting it? Because if that kick slams through and you're on one leg, you're going to be in an even worse state than you were to start with. As it turned out, because he was always slamming in the right leg ahead of him, even when Yoel was coming in with the side kick, he was getting knocked off balance and not being able to stomp through on the kick. I think the same thing is true of the low round kick as is true of the straight kicks to the knee. The answer is to move your fucking leg. It's not rocket science, but because guys are in the habit of trying to check things or step through things, they end up eating this kick low. And if you try and check a low round kick, all that happens is that it slams in on your shin while you're on one leg. Where with a kick to the thigh, you're raising your knee and bringing the hardest part of the top of the shin into the path of the kick. When you raise your leg for a low calf kick, or for either a calf kick, it ends up just being a lower calf kick and kicking like the flapping foot and shin while you're on one leg. I think you're going to see a real taking off in guys just retracting the leg. Darren Till does it a ton. Dan Hooker, when he fought Mark Chikadze, did it. And, you know, there are guys who do it well, like in the traditional Thai style, where you just slide that leg back into your stance or throw your hips back a little bit and your arms up in the air and you go, way, as you do it. But even doing it in like a herky-jerky, just get the hell out of dodge way works. You saw Robert Whittaker in the first Ramiro fight was just leaping backwards, like throwing his leg back behind him, shifting into the other stance, but really just basically running from the kick. I think, yeah, you just need to see people start moving their leg. Retract the leg into the stance, throw up a kick with the same leg. That's always a great answer. It's been my favourite for years. Pull the leg, like any low kick really, pull the lead leg back into the stance and immediately whip it up in a high kick, because if they stand around or if they're still on one leg or having kicked, you've got a good chance of freaking them out a little bit and putting them off kicking lazily next time. Generally, I would say that offering a counter is more useful to dissuading someone from attacking or going to a tactic than just being able to defend it. But you know, you build layers of this stuff. Like, you got to be able to defend stuff, and then you got to try and, by being able to defend stuff, you can, in the course of training, work out how that looks when you're waiting for it. You know, how the opponent's telegraphing it, or how opponents generally telegraph it, and that allows you to get timing down on your counters and start experimenting with stuff. Learning to counter shit without being able to defend it, like, is basically like, well, you know, you need to have your cover up and survive before you have your slick head movement along the ropes and things like that. You got to get the basic layer of absolute worst case scenario, I can go to this stuff, in before you start working on exploiting pinpoint moments in the opponent's game. Cheers, Cameron. Hey, Jack, why do you think so many MMA fighters seem to have a big issue with fighting while going backwards? JDS, Rockhold, Barboza, and Pettis all have this problem, just to name a few. It doesn't seem to be as prevalent in boxing or Muay Thai, even with younger developing fighters, so why is it such a common flaw in MMA? Also, if you could live through one boxer's career, who would it be and why? I know a lot run simultaneously, but let's say you could see only one, or you could only see one. Love the podcast and the articles, and if you ever do a Sugar Ray Robinson episode on the Patreon, it would be absolutely lovely. Thanks again, from Connor. I'm going to assume that's McGregor. Sugar Ray episode, definitely on the cards. I read his memoir recently enough that I don't want to read it again right now, but, you know, not recently enough that I can remember it all. So, you know, probably a few months down the line, that episode. But obviously a very busy episode to do. The dude did more than any other boxer probably ring. The number of title reigns and losing the title and re-winning the title and changing weight classes. Let's go with the backing up question first. I think a lot of it has to do with training for the cage, but also wrestling. You know, the distance in MMA is considerably greater than that in boxing or kickboxing. And then obviously kickboxing and Muay Thai, generally dudes fight higher in their stance and are ready to get up on one leg much more commonly. But, you know, that's just a key difference. That's nothing to do with moving onto the ropes. I just wandered off on a tangent there. I think the cage encourages fighters to basically not learn to circle out as quickly. If you're fighting in a small roped square, you have to be able to cut those angles off the ropes really quick. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting stuck there. If you are training in a big open... Well, firstly, a lot of guys train on a big open mat, which means that... And also, you know, there's a lot of other people training with them. So, you know, it's never like... You know, the real sparring that most people do is in the cage when they're doing specific preparation for a fight. And the cage is very forgiving compared to the ring because you can just run around it. But whether it's the use of the cage or the distance or something else, something about MMA encourages people to just step back. And, I mean, that works, you know, in MMA because there's so much distance in the cage that you can do it. But if you just keep doing that, you will obviously hit the cage soon, which is why when you watch someone like Holly Holm or Lyoto Machida, they are very good at one step back and then one step off to the side. They never get caught on train tracks. Because if you're running away from... That's the old boxing analogy. If you're running away from a train, you know, eventually it's going to catch up with you. You're on train tracks. You take a step to the side and you get off the train tracks. I think it's the over-reliance on retreat that mainly does fighters in, but I also think a lot of these fighters know how to circle out. They're training with boxing coaches. They have been taught to circle out, and they're told to circle out when they're doing the mitts and things. I think they just have very bad awareness of where they are in the cage. And again, Holly Holm's one who's very good at knowing exactly where she is in the cage. If you watch her fight with Ronda Rousey, obviously, but another one is Joanna Jędrzejczyk. If you watch her fight with Jessica Andrade, she knows exactly where she is in the cage at all times. And I think it's a little bit more difficult in the cage. In the ring, you can look at the opposite ropes, whereas in the 8-sided cage, which is almost circular, you're getting a bit of a warped perspective on how far you are from the opposite. One thing that really would help fighters in the UFC, the UFC mat is marked with the interior octagon on the mat, and if you look at a lot of the gyms the bigger gyms, some of them, I can't say all of them because I haven't watched sparring at every big gym, but most of those octagons don't have that interior line. And I think if you're fighting in the UFC and you've got that interior line, that's really good for gauging the distance between you and the cage. If you watch the Jędrzejczyk versus Andrade fight, she barely ever leaves that black marking on the mat. And I think that'd be a good way to train people, just make sure they know where they are in the cage. The problem is, I don't think Bellator has it. And, you could turn up to a UFC event and they might just not have it because they wanted to put some more sponsors on or something like that. It'd be nice if a regulation cage had to have an interior that traced the circumference of the outside fence. I think that would make people... it would give the opportunity for people to get much better at ringcraft. But now I'm just pattering on. I think it's just because guys back up too much and they don't know when they're going to hit the fence because the cage is so big. And because, it's a big circle. It's not like a nice square where you know roughly where you're going to end up hitting the fence, or the ropes rather. If I could live through one boxer's career, I think I've said this before, but I would love... not necessarily the best boxer of all time, but just a fascinating character. Kid McCoy, I would love to tag along on his adventures as he worked his way across the States being a cheeky chappy. Getting into bar brawls and fighting locals on weird islands and shit like that. His life just reads like one of those old British adventurer books. A very interesting chap. Was he murdered? I can't remember. I think I'd leave him before he got murdered if he was murdered. Stanley Ketchel was murdered. He's another interesting one. But actually, he had the Phil Hartman situation where I think his wife murdered him in his sleep. Anyway, cheers, Connor. And you have my word that a Sugar Ray episode will happen. Hi, Jack. Huge fan of the podcast and your articles. Love your work. I have a question related to what kind of guard game is suitable for limiting the opponent's ability to strike in MMA. It seems that even though closed guard is a relatively neutral position in BJJ, in MMA the bottom fighter in closed guard risks being locked onto an opponent who can consistently throw powerful strikes for an extended period of time. Especially if the opponent stands up, is there a guard that you would recommend instead? Brackets De La Riva, single leg X? Or would you have specific pointers about the closed guard to limit strikes? Thanks for considering my question. Your boy, Alan. I'm a big fan of inside... Well, this is the new thing. We're all talking about inside control since the Danaher DVDs came out. I've always liked inside hooks and things like that because, butterfly hooks they're also called, because not only are you able to use your quads, which are fairly sizable muscles, to manipulate distance between you and the opponent, and they have to keep on top of you to make sure you're flat on your back. If they let up for a moment, you should be able to make something happen and get up or start getting up. In the closed guard, the problem is that they can actually just rest on top of you, and you have to open your legs before you do anything. We talked about Lamas's guard against Bektik last week, getting taken down into closed guard, and then he'd slide in the knee shield, scissor his hips, and put in one butterfly hook, just to have something to make stuff happen. The other thing about having a butterfly hook is that you have that foot on the floor, basically. You are going between controlling the inside of their thigh or their inseam and putting your foot on the floor. So at any point, if they let the pressure up, you can hit a technical stand-up without having to open your legs and do a preliminary motion. Regarding the opponent's standing, it's tricky because guys are very good in MMA, exploding up, driving the hips forward and popping your guard open. You don't see the De La Riva much, but I do. Personally, I play a lot of reverse De La Riva because I like a lot of half guard. But that's within a grappling context, reverse De La Riva is extremely useful. If you watch Rafa Mendes versus Rodolfo Vieira, that's a really significant. I think it was the No-Gi Worlds, and that's like one of Rafa Mendes' best no-gi performances, because he's a guy known for the berimbolo and the De La Riva, and the De La Riva really is very much generally considered a gi guard, because most of the sweeps involve either like berimbolo coming up on the sitting guard with a lapel or something like that. But he used reverse De La Riva really well in that match. And the great thing about it is, like, if someone stands from your half guard, and you have the you change the reverse De La Riva, and you catch the ankle, and once you have that ankle, it's very difficult for them to get back on their knees again. So you have them in this position where you've really cut their options down. So you're always threatening to invert and go between their legs and come out their back. If they start pressuring in and lowering their level, you can always elevate them and try and move to like deep half guard. And if they stand back, there's tripod sweeps that, you know, while you don't see them at the highest level very much, they're always there. The guy takes the pressure off because he's scared of getting his back taken or something like that. So that's why I like the reverse De La Riva, and because it gives you a degree of control. Like, you control, the Mendes are always on about controlling distance with the guard. The reverse De La Riva lets you control the distance and keep them standing. You know, it's going to be very hard for them to get back onto their knees if they try. The downside, of course, is that in MMA, reverse De La Riva generally is not as safe, because you don't have much to protect you from the opponent throwing big old overhand haymakers at you. The De La Riva has worked pretty well for a few guys. And what I really like about the De La Riva for MMA, well, firstly, if the guy isn't actively pressuring and standing over you, you should be getting up. But if the guy has one foot in your guard and he's trying to pressure you and strike down on you, the De La Riva is pretty nice, because if he is in a standing position, you can kick him in the head. And you have one foot on him, like controlling the distance and allowing you to feel where he is. If you watch Gegard Mousasi, obviously we all remember doing some nice up kicking from De La Riva, but also hitting nice tripod sweeps. Both the Pettis brothers hit nice tripod sweeps from the De La Riva guard. And a really interesting one to watch is Thomas Narkun. He straight up knocks people out with up kicks. If you stand in his guard, he's going to up kick you in the face and knock you out. So general rule would be, don't let people stand in your guard. If they stand up, you should be trying to get up. But if they're standing up and keeping pressure and standing over you, I would probably err on the side of De La Riva rather than reverse De La Riva for MMA, even though reverse De La Riva is my jam. Oh, the other one you said was single leg X. Now, the thing about that is that single leg X, a lot of people don't really consider it a guard. It is basically an attack. In the same way that, like, deep half guard is not really a guard, it's a sweeping position. The actual work to get deep half guard is done from either half guard or reverse De La Riva. Single leg X is a leg entanglement. You're in on the leg. You're looking for either a sweep or a heel hook or a transition to proper X, but even proper X is also just like an attacking guard. You're getting there by like having an inside hooks kind of guard, inside position. So that could be butterfly guard. That could be half guard with a butterfly hook in. That could be elbow deep on the De La Riva, the underhook De La Riva, and then swinging the leg through. But yeah, single leg X is an awesome position, especially for grappling, as in like grappling competition, but very much not something that you can just say, okay, I'm going to play some single leg X guard. A single leg X is like, I'm going to play my guard and attack the single leg X when I get the chance to, or make the chance to. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. That's just sort of my perspective on it. Cheers, Alan. Man, there was nothing to talk about this week, and I still managed to do an hour before we even previewed this event. So what we got going down? There's a few I don't know on here. Olka Sasaki's back against Janelle Losa. Yeah, that'll be fun. I quite like Sasaki. He's a Greco-Roman wrestler, but really long, lanky guy for flyweight. And his striking seems to be coming along a bit. You know, he made Wilson Hayes look very average. Well, Wilson Hayes is very average, but he made Wilson Hayes look very average, like immediately before Wilson Hayes was put into a title shot again. Naoki Inoue, undefeated flyweight, coming in at 11-0 against Matt Schnell, who's 11-4. That's an interesting one. It makes you wonder if... Because the UFC's attitude to Asian events was like, All Asians are the same. They'll like it if an Asian wins. We're going to Macau. Come on, Kung Lee, you're Vietnamese. But Inoue debuted with a decision win over Carl's John de Thomas back at Holm versus Correa. And Machnell lost to Tim Elliott on the Ultimate Fighter, lost to Rob Font, lost to Hector Sandoval, picked up a win in his last fight. Yeah, that looks like they want Inoue to win, but I wouldn't call that like a gimme by any means. Jake Matthews versus Chinchou, is that a name? Chinchou Anzai? That's your number 49 welterweight in the world versus your number 144th welterweight in the world on Tapology. Hector Aldana versus Keenan Song. Keenan Song fighting out of Hebei, China, a Chinese man. Hector Aldana, 4 fights in Mexico regional circuit, and then 1-1 on the Ultimate Fighter. Okay. Maybe I'd be hyped for this if I lived in Singapore or Asia generally. Teruto Ishihara's back against Petr Yan. Cool. I mean, Teruto Ishihara, the ship's kind of sailed on that. People know that he's not that good. He's got an okay left hand, and he wrestles okay too, but he's not going to be setting the world on fire anytime soon. Li Jiangliang, fresh off driving his thumbs into Jake Matthews' eyes. Funnily enough, he lost to Jake Matthews, and Jake Matthews is on the prelims while Li Jiangliang is on the main card. But of course, he's Asian. He's fighting Daiichi Abe, who's 6-1 from Japan. Jessica Rose Clark versus Jessica Ai. How is Jessica Ai still ranked number 20 in the world at flyweight? When did she beat someone? Oh wow, she won her last fight. I completely forgot about that. By split decision, having lost 4 on the trot. Yeah, forgive me for not being hype about that fight. Tyson Pedro versus Ovinson Prue. I was actually going to write something about Tyson Pedro this week. Very interesting chappy. Not an awful lot of footage on him because he's only 7-1. But he's fighting Ovinson Prue, and that is jumping in at the deep end. Ovinson Prue, obviously like the best of the young people. Meanwhile, Tyson Pedro, obviously, win over Khalil Roundtree, coming in on short notice, which is very impressive. And then he beat Paul Craig after that, knocked out Paul Craig because Paul Craig got no hands and also got no chin. And then he lost to Ilir Latifi. That is a tough old fight for Tyson Pedro. You know, that's the kind... Ovinson Prue has a lot of flaws, but he is so athletic and hits hard enough that he's very much a problem for everyone in that division. Could well be too much too soon. And then Leon Edwards versus Don Cerrone. I mean, I'll probably write an article on that for Friday. I like Edwards. He's interesting because he came in like as a striker. Everyone knew him as a striker because he starched his first guy in like 15 seconds or whatever it was. And now he's like the British wrestler. It's quite interesting. But anyway, I'll get out of here for this week, and we'll catch up on Monday probably, and then depending on how the schedule's looking. Obviously, it's the World Cup at the moment, which I didn't know, to be honest. Like, I was going, why is there nothing on? And then people were like, it's World Cup, Jack. Normally, it's things like college basketball, where I have an excuse not to know, but this is... I managed to completely disassociate this in my mind from why the schedule of my sport would have changed. Anyway, sign up to the Patreon because the Barney Ross episode is up, and I'm quite pleased with it. The guy had an amazing life. It's called Barney Ross, Champion Hero Junkie, and it's a moving one. And then, if you want to keep up with my articles, go to fightprimer.com. If you want to send us an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And buy Notorious because the new one's out. And it's got the whole Money Mayweather fight debacle in it. And you get to hear what I think of Floyd Mayweather and all that stuff. I'm your boy Jack Slack. And I'll catch you next week. Cheers.